Oh, baby. We've got a good one for you today, I think. We're glad you joined us for this episode of reviews on the Absolute Sound. And we're going to talk today about what I think might be one of the most significant products, not of the year, but of this decade. That means the 2020s. And that is the Magnepan LRS Plus loudspeaker. I'm going to talk a lot about how I think it works, how it performed in my listening tests, all the good old stuff. But I want to set this up first with an analogy or help you imagine what I'm going to try to describe, because this speaker is a little bit different, and to really understand it, you've got to think in somewhat different terms than I think most of you conventionally think about audio gear. It's not that there's anything wrong with how you think about it. It's just this speaker requires a somewhat different perspective to get why it is so interesting and I think could be so valuable to many of you. Whether you buy it or don't buy it, you definitely should hear it. So let me start this out with a really simple idea, which is imagine that you're a scout for some kind of sporting league. That could be American-style football, that could be American-style basketball, that could be FIFA soccer or football, whichever you like to call it. That could be Indian field hockey or Formula One. Doesn't matter. Imagine this, and I think you'll be able to relate to this if you know anything about sports. Imagine that you discover Michael Jordan, the basketball star, but when he's early in his career at the University of North Carolina, or maybe it was NC State. Sorry, I'm not a basketball expert. Or imagine that you find Max Verstappen, the current F1 champion, when he is in karting and he is 14 years old. Or imagine that you find Tom Brady at the University of Michigan. Tom Brady has won, I believe, more Super Bowls than any other quarterback in the history of the National Football League. And I could go on and on with examples if I knew more about sporting leagues around the world. But I think you get the idea. You'd be amazed. You'd want to run out and tell everybody. You'd be like, whoa, you can't believe what I just found. This player is amazing. And yet, if you think now about what their careers were like, you would say, yeah, but like Tom Brady is really good and there's a lot going on there and all of that stuff is nice, but Aaron Rodgers is a different kind of player and in some ways a better and more interesting player. Or, yeah, Max Verstappen is kind of cool, but he's also sort of a crazy man and maybe he won't win that much. What about Michael Schumacher? Michael Schumacher was amazing. He was consistent. He did what he did. In Formula One, you could do the same thing and have a debate in your head about Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna. They were one of my favorite examples here because they were great, but they were great in different ways. So what I'm trying to set up is that there are lots of great players and there's lots of great audio gear. And within that great audio gear or within those great players, it also helps to understand what kind of player are we talking about? What kind of greatness are we talking about? Because there really just isn't universal greatness. Now, I'm a Packers fan, not a Patriots fan, so of course I would say this, but like Aaron Rodgers is way more exciting than Tom Brady. On the other hand, you have to say Tom Brady's run a bunch of Super Bowls and Aaron Rodgers, I think, has only won one. So, I mean, if you just want to go quantitative, Brady's the better quarterback, right? The same thing with Verstappen and Schumacher, although Verstappen's career isn't over yet. But Verstappen and Schumacher, there's just no competition quantitatively. But if you look at driving style, you might go, man, Max is really amazing and exciting, and Schumacher was kind of machine-like. You could say the same thing about Senna and Prost. And there are all sorts of examples like that in different sporting environments. So let me get down to the Magnepan LRS Plus. If you haven't, you should first watch the preview that Chris Martins, one of our reviewers, and Wendell Diller of Magnepan did to talk about the background of the speaker, some of the history of Magnepan, how Magnepans work, how they're made, all of that kind of stuff. But to summarize, just in case you don't get a chance to watch that or you want to watch this end to end, Magnepans are a little bit different. The Magnepan LRS Plus is about 52 inches high. It's about 1 foot wide, 12 inches, and it's 1 inch thick. So it's very different from typical speakers that live in a box made of wood. I mean, I'm sure there's some wood in LRS Plus as well, but it's not in a typical enclosure or cabinet or box. That's because Magnepans are planar magnetic speakers. There's a thin sheet of a plastic type material that is, a mil thick or something like that, and approximately just less than the dimensions of the speaker. So in this case, maybe it's 46 by 10 inches wide. So really, if you think about it in speaker terms, the speaker driver, the thing that actually pushes the air and makes the sound, is fairly big on a Magnepan. But it's a sheet of mylar with wires glued to it and an array of magnets that sit behind the wires that are glued to the sheet of mylar. And the interaction between the electrical signal and the magnetic field of those magnets is what pushes that big diaphragm back and forth. And since there's no cabinet, the Magnepans radiate both to the front, like a normal speaker, and to the back. The rear wave of the speaker is not absorbed. Electrostatic speakers are similar, but the driving principle is slightly different. You can look all of that up in a variety of books or on Wikipedia, but Magnepans run by a different principle than most box speakers that most of us are used to as loudspeaker. Okay, so it has a somewhat different principle, the operating principle of the speaker, and you might expect, well, that might lead to a different sound. But what I want to get down to is not the theory of the speaker and not the measurements or any of that stuff, but I want to talk about what's special about the sound of this speaker because it's really exceptional. I need to note that this is a speaker that sells for $995 per pair. $995 per pair, not $9,995. This is the absolute sound, so not $99,995, just short of $1,000. To put that in perspective, for those of you who are new to the hobby, that's a relatively inexpensive speaker among very high quality, high performance speakers. I know $1,000 isn't chump change, so I'm not trying to tell you whether that's a lot or a little. I'm trying to say in the broad range of speakers that exist in high performance audio, that's a relatively inexpensive speaker. Just to put that in extreme context, we just reviewed a pair of speakers from Magico, wonderful speakers. Robert Harley thinks they're the best speakers in the world. $750,000. So this is 1/750th the cost of the Magico M9. And Wilson and other manufacturers make plenty of expensive speakers, and there are lots of speakers for $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. There's all sorts of price points, just like with cars. There's something for every budget. But these are relatively inexpensive. What I'm here to tell you and why I'm so excited about this and why I might sound kind of revved up about this speaker is because I am kind of revved up about this speaker, because in some ways, this speaker at $995 is competitive with the best speakers that exist. Yes, I said it there. For $1,000, you can have a speaker that does things that speakers at much higher prices sometimes don't do, and speakers at very high prices can do, but don't, in my view, do materially better. I want to talk about what those are because, to go back to my opening analogy, like Max Verstappen or like Aaron Rodgers, the Magnepan LRS does some things really well and other things not so well, and some things really not at all. And you need to know what those are, because this might not be the speaker for you, but because it is so exceptional at what it does do well, it's really a speaker you need to hear, because you really should be asking yourself the question, does this speaker do the thing I really like that I didn't even know I liked, but that makes a huge difference in my sense of musical realism and my connection with the musical performance? And I want to say that for me, this speaker delivered some things that brought me closer to the musical performance, even though if I gave you my list of 30 parameters that I evaluate, they're not that great on, 15 of those 30 parameters. All right, let's get down to it with some specifics. Here we go. The thing number one about the LRS Plus is the way it floats an image in space. The sound doesn't seem to be coming from the speakers. The sound seems to be coming from what we call a sound stage that is arrayed across the front of your room and has a height and a width that is very natural sounding, like there was a stage in front of you and there were performers on that stage. If you think about what we mean by the concept of the absolute sound, which is the sound of live music, generally played on acoustic instruments as a reference point, but the sound of live music played on acoustic instruments in a real space, not in a studio. There's nothing wrong with studios. This is using it as a reference. The absolute sound is the sound of live music in a real space, and that's really kind of like saying a concert hall or a club or a venue where performers are performing. They're generally on a stage, and you want to hear the sound, and the producer is trying to produce the sound as if the band or the orchestra were playing live, and you want to hear it in space. What's impressive to me, having been doing this for a long time, is the degree to which, once that spatial presentation is extremely realistic, as it is with the Magnepan LRS Plus, all of a sudden the music just seems more gripping and real, not as an analytical character, right? It's not that I'm sitting here going, check image width, check stage height. I mean, reviewers do those things, trust me. Reviewers definitely do those things, and we take piles of notes, and you can get all analytical about it. That's not how you listen to music. You don't listen to music with a checklist next to you. You listen to music and go, man, does this grab me? Does this sound real? Do I get a sense that I'm connecting with what the artist is doing? And I hadn't really fully appreciated the degree to which the presentation of the artist in space is such a big determining factor in how real the music sounds. I mean, it sounds like duh once you say it, but you have to hear these speakers properly demonstrated to understand what that spatial presentation does for realism and your connection with the music. Now, let me describe it in a little more detail so you understand what I think is so outstanding about this. So there's almost no sense that the performers are like in the speakers or on the speakers. It's very common with a lot of speakers that I have listened to, a lot of systems that I have listened to. They sound like they're in space. The general plane of the image is behind the speakers, which helps you imagine a wider stage than wherever you have the speakers set up. And the height of the image is very appropriate to what the stage height would be if there were a stage way down there. Of course, you're not going to have a stage in your room, but it seems, I'm going to say, well proportioned to how a concert would sound if you were listening to it at a reasonable distance. So somehow they deliver, even though there's not a height signal here, they deliver a sense of height and of width that seems proportional to the room that they're in. Now, whether they can do this in all rooms or not, I don't know. I doubt it. They're not that big. Magnepan has bigger speakers for bigger rooms than I used. I tried to use a room that was appropriate to the size of the speaker and its output capability. The room I used is about 8 feet by 17 by 13, so I think not uncommon for the kinds of rooms that people have in real houses, but that stage width and stage height felt very well proportioned. Then on top of that, what they add to this spaciousness sensibility is being able to produce a sense of depth where you can hear the instrumental overtones decay and you get the sense that the performers are in a real three-dimensional space. And that requires the speaker to be able to deliver down to very low tonal levels, because the thing that delivers this sense of spaciousness on a recording is the decay of the musical sounds as they reflect off the walls of the room in which the recording was made. And as those reflections occur, there's a natural decay in level of the sounds, and that decay in level is what gives the ear information about the space that the sound is occurring in. So somehow these must be relatively quiet speakers able to create low-level sounds quite accurately and quite well. Or at least that's how it sounds to me, and therefore the spaciousness is outstanding. All right, so this sense of space and a realistic width, height, and depth space that gives you the sense that the performers are in a real concert environment is the first kind of wow virtual reality. I don't know if you've ever used virtual reality goggles, but if you try virtual reality goggles, it's not at all like looking at a regular computer display. That third dimension and that sense of spaciousness it's really attention grabbing the first time you see it and experience it. It's just a different, more accurate feeling of what environments are like when you're in a real VR goggle space. And these are like in some ways, the VR goggles of loudspeakers, at least among relatively inexpensive loudspeakers. So there's that sense of space, realistic space, that is outstanding. It's super impressive, and it's super impressive for its ability to connect you to the music. So that's part one. Part two, which I bet is related to this first part, but I want to explain it differently because it's a completely different sensation in my mind, but goes nicely together with this spatial presentation, is the ability of the Magnepan LRS to separate players, instrumentalists or vocalists, and not have them congealed or mushed together or smeared together in a way that they sound like they've been processed and coagulated in some way. I'm putting it in rather negative terms, but when you hear that removed and you hear each player in space sounding very much like they're playing individually, you realize how much smearing and congealing can happen in a lot of audio systems. I'm probably exaggerating the degree of this, but that combination of spatial realism plus the ability to not have the instrumentalists blurred or the vocalist and the instrumentalist blurred together really helps you have the sense that it's like there's a real band, a real orchestra playing in your room. Again, outstanding. I have very rarely heard a system that can do those two things together in such a realistic way. And as I say, it, in my mind, it really helps to connect you with the music. Now, I want to say a little bit more about the connecting with the music part, because there's I kind of discovered something while I was listening to the LRS Pluses, and I hadn't quite realized the degree to which this happens. When the stage presentation is not as accurate, and when the performers are to some degree blurred together, or some people have called it like, it's like looking through a fine gauze. There's something that just, maybe pleasingly, but to some degree fuzzes up the image. If you like optical analogies, that's sort of an optical idea of what we're talking about. And then you imagine removing the very fine gauze or film, and all of a sudden, bang, clear sound. If that analogy appeals to you and connects with you, what I hadn't realized was the degree to which having the gauze there makes it much easier for the music to kind of recede into the background. I don't mean it disappears and goes far away. I mean you aren't as connected with it. Like, I go to about 50 concerts a year, and when I listen to live concerts, it's like gripping, and you pay attention. I mean, if the music's bad or the performers are bad, okay, maybe not so much. But if the performers are good and they're doing music you like, a live performance is just like so involving and thrilling. And I hadn't realized the degree to which this little gauziness, very subtle, removes you one step from that element of the dynamism and impact of a live performance. Well, the LRS Plus, because it's removed the gauze and it's presenting the performers in a realistic sense of space, it's like, it probably sounds weird already, but I'll weird you out even more. It's like you can't not listen to the music. You have to pay attention. This is, in my experience, one of, I've heard a few others and I could tell you about them, but this is one of the ultimate foreground music speakers. If you want to sit down and listen to music and have something that, reaches out and grabs you, this speaker just, it's like that teacher you had in 10th grade who just wouldn't let you not pay attention. You need to pay attention. Now, you might not want that. I'm not preaching universals here. I mean, I happen to think it's great. I happen to really love music. I happen to think this speaker does things that are extremely rare. So I'm psyched about it. And the fact that it's $9.95 is like, wow. That's a kind of a big deal in my mind. So you can see why I get revved up about this thing, but it just puts the music there in a way that you can pay attention, and it puts the music there in a way you can hear things like all the work the producer put into a track to do all of these little things that really make the song or the particular orchestration or the way the conductor is doing the symphony. All of these little details come together in a way that you can listen to a piece 5 different times and listen to 5 different elements of it and hear new things. And then you can kind of step back and go, oh, I see how that all comes together. It's really a fascinating experience. I have had this happen, a few other times with some really good equipment, but at this price point, and really across a lot of price points, this is doing an exceptional thing. Now, I want to get to some drawbacks, but I want to talk about some things that aren't drawbacks, but I wouldn't necessarily say that they're standout strengths of the Magnepan LRS either. It somehow does what I'm talking about without being annoying. So I really get the sense that a lot of the phenomena I'm talking about are being delivered by the LRS Plus because it's just doing a good job of processing the signal and putting it into the room and getting it to your ears. That doesn't mean it's perfect, so I want to say, I think a thing you would immediately notice is, I would say, if you had to pick a term, the frequency balance is slightly tilted to be maybe a tiny bit bright in the treble, and there definitely is less bass than you'll find with a lot of other speakers. And if you know your bass operating principles, which you don't need to know, I'll just tell you, it's a dipole speaker. It radiates forward and backwards, like I said before, and speakers that do that have a physics cutoff, roll-off really, to the bass. And so they're just generally, unless they're huge, and these are not huge, unless they're huge, dipole speaker will have a roll-off relatively high in the bass, and you're just not going to get really mid-bass or low bass to any great degree. That said, the bass is actually quite pleasing, and because there's no box, I think that's why, the bass is tight and accurate and clean and clear and all the other qualities I talked about. So I found, truthfully, the bass quite enjoyable, but this is not the power pop, organ, hip hop speaker for anybody, I don't think. I will come back in another episode and talk about an experiment that I'm going to do and have been promising for a while, which is using subs with the LRS Plus and Magnepan. Watch our preview. Magnepan has revealed a dipole subwoofer to go specifically with Magnepan speakers. So there might be a thing there. There might not. I don't know. We shall see. But it feels like a speaker, just listening to it, it feels like a speaker that with a sub could just, it could destroy. I'm hopeful, but I haven't tried it. I've got the test speakers in the back room, so we'll see, hopefully in a couple of weeks, maybe a month, how that goes. But the speaker is not the deep bass, high power output bass speaker that some of you might want. So again, a teeny bit bright maybe. There is a way that Magnepan supplies to adjust the treble of the speaker. So I will also be back to report on how experiments with, you put a resistor, you add a resistor to the crossover network. I bought some additional values to be able to tweak it in a very fine way. So we'll see if maybe we can just slightly tweak the treble. But again, I didn't find the brightness to really be a problem. I just think you're going to notice it. The treble is smooth. And again, the detail and the sound staging and the instrumental separation are just so musically involving that you almost don't want to mess with what's going on here. A final word, which, is this a drawback? You be the judge. Like, I believe, essentially all Magnepans, this speaker is very inefficient, and this speaker needs high power. You might listen to chamber music and maybe high power wouldn't be required if that's kind of all you do. I've listened to it with a 100 watt per channel amplifier and it's sounded pretty good, but the magic really happens when you get big power connected to these things. And unfortunately, life is full of trade-offs, and one of the trade-offs is power is not free. So if you're going to have enough power for these, I was using 500 watts per channel. If you're going to have big, I don't know that there's any particular magic to 500. That's just what I happen to have to test drive these with. But if you're going to have big power, something like that is not going to be free. You're going to spend significantly more on the amplifier than you are on the speaker. So another preview of coming attractions, I'm going to be doing a test of some high power amplifiers and some lower power amplifiers to really understand like how much power do you need, and is power like a major factor in what we're hearing here. I want to say as an aside, I discovered a strange thing with the LRS Plus and high power amplifiers. I thought it was strange. Maybe like, a million people have gone down this path, but it was kind of a new thing in my mind, which is a speaker with this level of detail and this level of articulation and this level of delicacy and ability to handle the decay of instruments and to reflect the tonality of, like, I happen to love acoustic guitar, so I'm a bit of a fan of like the different top and body materials and body sizes, and yeah, well, there's plenty of craziness in the world and I love it. Anyway, I like listening to acoustic instruments and hearing how the acoustic signature of different instruments differs. And I find that beautiful and enjoyable. So I kind of expected, maybe this is just my warped mind at work, but I kind of expected the Magnepans not to be great with basically big rock and roll. Let me give you an example just so we can talk about some real music. As you can see, I'm not 15 years old. I happen to be a fan of the band Rush. Neil Peart and Geddy Lee and those guys were just, they were amazing, but they're kind of a stadium rock deal. I mean, it's big power stuff. If you see Neil's, R.I.P., if you see Neil's drum kit, and if you see their live concerts, they had a big sound. Okay? Rush sounds fantastic on the LRS Pluses. So big rock and roll did really well. Big symphonic music did really well. So did individual acoustic guitar. Bluegrass with one performer, Gillian Welch. Fantastic. I loved the way all of that sounded. But power pop was, from my point of view, really nice. Now, again, it would be meatier and grippier if we had flatter, low frequencies below maybe 80, 90 hertz. Definitely think that would improve things. But at high levels, and don't deafen yourself, but at what I would consider high, relatively high listening levels, 90, 95 dB, what you might hear in a concert if it's not stupidly loud and you're not like up front standing next to the stage, which is like, seriously, man, don't do that without earplugs. But if you were at a reasonable distance, and if the guy on the soundboard didn't want to try to kill everyone by bleeding them to death through their ears, things were played at kind of enjoyable levels. This can reproduce stuff in your room at those kind of output levels, and I just found I could go through my whole library, and everything I played and I have fairly mundane tastes, but everything I played from Miles Davis to Rush, the one that got me the most was a relatively new Black Keys album. And, you know, it's super bluesy, guitar-driven stuff, but it was just like, wow. And I like the Black Keys. So, I mean, of course I liked it, but it just, so many different styles of music sounded good that I really think this is a speaker a lot of you could love. Final kind of drawback, I think, is I do think this is a speaker that needs some work. And by that I mean it might need subs. You might have to find the right amplifier. You might have to pair it with the right preamp to really get it dialed in. Just because I'm a reviewer, I use some super high-end cables. Maybe, I don't know that it needs them, but maybe the cables really matter. That sense, it may be, I don't know, but it may be a kind of tweaky speaker, or positive point of view, if you like the audio hobby, seems to me to be a kind of speaker that you really could develop a system around where you'd have a lot of fun trying to figure out, how do I make the most of this? What is the right amplifier? What's the best matching preamp? What cartridge works really well with this? Not because there's a lot that has to be solved, but because it's so revealing, you've got to get it right, or you want to get it right. It's like you're paid off for getting it right. So, I hope I've been clear. I think the Magnepan LRS Plus is a really exceptional speaker, and not just because it's $995, although the fact that it's $995 does, I mean, it just can't help but affect your brain and make you think, wow, this is a speaker at least everyone should hear, because almost anybody who's in the high-performance audio game could use this speaker in their system, especially if you're talking about systems where the total cost of everything is, I'm going to say, 10 grand and up, where you could have a big power amplifier and you could have a really high-quality preamp, and your front end, your sources, D-to-A converter or turntable or both, could be very refined and capable of exploiting what this speaker could offer. So, I loved it, but it is not the Tom Brady of speakers. It is not pretty good at everything and always good at all those things. It is more spectacular at certain things and maybe needs to do some practice on footwork. But it's a totally practicable thing, and you're the coach, so I think you could really bring something amazing out of the speaker. I hope you've enjoyed this. Again, I would encourage you to go back and look at that preview that Chris Martins and Wendell Diller did. It talks a lot more about the background of the speaker and what Magnepan is trying to do, and it talks extensively about the Magnepan dipole subwoofer. I also hope you'll check back in, like I say, a month or so and check in on my experiments with power amps and subwoofers, and maybe I find some other interesting stuff that are kind of part of my tuning project for what I think will prove to be one of the great speakers of the 2020s. Thank you for watching. As always, remember to subscribe. That way we can, or YouTube can send you notifications about some of those future videos and a lot of the other exciting videos, interviews, audio basics that we're covering to try to take care of you. Thank you very much.